Idols. This is what my message is on this morning, is idols. And I want to ask you, what is the difference between the first and the second of the Ten Commandments? First off, does anybody know what the first commandment is? First of the Ten Commandments. Anybody raise your hand, know it? What is it? Love thy God. That is the first commandment and the primary commandment in the New Testament. What about in the Old Testament? We have 10 commandments back there, those dusty old stones that he etched on. What's the first of the 10 old commandments? Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Yes. What is the second commandment? Do not make any idols. Do not make any idols, and thou shalt have no other gods before me. And I was thinking about those two, and they seem to overlap quite a bit in my mind. You know, it seems almost repetitive to say, don't make idols, but you just said don't have any other gods before me, so if you're making idols, you're breaking the first commandment. And so that kind of got me into studying this and looking into, okay, are there any distinctions between these two? And what I came to realize is really, here's the first commandment and the second is like it. Here's the broad over-facing thing. Kind of in the New Testament, he says, love the Lord your God with all your heart and your soul and your mind. And the second is like it, love your neighbors as yourself. And they're very intertwined, though they have some distinctions. So this is very similar. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. And the second is like it, do not make idols. Do not, the way I memorized it is, do not make unto thee any graven image of anything. My old King James, upbringing. But it wasn't until I got to reading it that there's a lot more in those verses, in that verse about the not making graven images that I had never realized was there. So if you would, turn to Exodus chapter 20, and we are going to read those first couple verses. Exodus chapter 20. Actually, I forgot my slide clicker. Thanks. All right, Exodus chapter 20. I don't think I put it up here. Yeah, there they are. First two commandments. I'm going to read verses 1 through 6. And the Lord spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a carved image, any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them, nor serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children, to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing mercy to thousands to those who love me and keep my commandments. So that's a whole lot more than what I memorized. Do not make unto thee any graven image of anything. So let's go through this second commandment here and kind of look at the different aspects that are there. You shall not make for yourself a carved image, is what my translation. You shall not make for yourself a carved image. So, why would they make carved images in the first place? Well, we got to think about where the Israelites are at this point in time. They had just left Egypt, and there were a lot of carved images all around them. Egypt was notorious for having a lot of different idols. And I feel like sometimes we look at the Old Testament people and think them unintelligent or maybe not very bright. How could you carve something out of wood and think that it's a god and attribute all these powers to it? But these aren't dumb people. They're not unintelligent, especially for their time. Egypt was very technologically advanced, as it were, for that day and age. But being in that culture around them, idolatry was a way of life for them. It was all over. They saw it every street corner. I'm sure idols were being sold. They were up in the temples. They were up and admired by the kings of the day. And so now they are isolated from all of that. Hopefully they didn't bring any idols with them, physically, whenever they left Egypt. They might have. But there's not that temptation everywhere going around them. There's not people on all the street corners of the wilderness saying, hey, buy these idols, or hey, worship this God, or anything like that. So in order to cut off that even further, he says, do not make idols. I've isolated from them, from the temptation, from the culture around you. Don't go back to that. Don't start fashioning idols back to this thought process that you had before. Next, it says, in any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. This also caught me off guard, because initially I was thinking, okay, if we're not to make an idol of these false gods, wouldn't it be us trying to recreate something that's in heaven? Trying to take this heavenly being that we think is up there and trying to make it here. But no, it says don't make anything that's in heaven above, or on earth beneath, or in the waters below. But if you look at these Egyptian gods that the people in Egypt were worshiping, oftentimes they took depictions, or it says they took forms of the things around us. This God that is the God of fertility and, bounty in the land would take the form of an ox or take the form of a bull. And sometimes they would take the form of a bull head on a human body. Or sometimes, the God of death would take the form of a jackal or the form of a jackal head on a human body, or these different various things. And whenever the Israelites do this, they are completely misunderstanding who the one true God is. They completely miss the point. See, God made us in his image. You could say that we are little idols of God. We are little models and representations of who God is. And he gave us the earth to have dominion over, to cultivate, to subdue, to be fruitful, and to multiply. And he charged that task to us. So now what we are doing is we are saying, oh, I don't want to cultivate, or it's too hard to cultivate this stuff, to subdue the earth and to multiply. So what am I going to do? I'm going to make something else. I'm going to craft my own idea of a God. We are going to take the truth of the one true God, set it aside, and his provision for us, and we are going to create for ourselves something to help make our lives easier. We are going to abandon the provision that God has given us, and we are going to craft something for ourselves that we are going to worship and we are going to appeal to. If we want more yield from our crops and from our fields, we're not going to pray to the one true God for that. What are we going to do? We're going to craft our own God and pray to him. We are seeking provision outside from what God has already given us. So we are misunderstanding, or they were misunderstanding, the true nature of God and his provision over them. Next it says, you shall not bow down to them nor serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. Do not bow down and do not serve them. So now we're getting kind of to the root of the issue, or the end of the issue, where its natural conclusion leads is to them bowing down and serving these false gods. And again, it's a lack of understanding or belief who the true God is. God is the controller of the entire universe. He is the sovereign God. He is the provider of all things. So anytime we attribute a bounty, we attribute things to these false gods, to these idols, we are misunderstanding that God is the one doing the provision. He is the one who is the true provider. And so when we're seeking abundance outside of his provision, we're seeking abundance from these other things, these false gods that we've created for ourselves, we misunderstand who God really is. And it says, for I am a jealous God. Now, saying he was a jealous God or is going to be a jealous God, he objectively is a jealous God. This is a fact, a statement of fact of who God is. That does not change from time period to time period. And he does not share his glory with these other things, much less created things from the thing that he created. It doesn't make any sense. He will not share his glory with others. This is an offense deserving of judgment. Now, the next one I had to struggle with for a while. Visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me. Visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me. So different sins have different consequences here on earth. We account them as little sins or big sins. You know, if I lie to my parents to get an extra cookie, that's one thing. If I murder somebody, that's another thing. They're both sins in God's eyes, but they have drastically different consequences in this world. The sin of having an idol in your life has far-reaching consequences to the generations that come after. And this is what God is saying to them. A child raised with idols in the homes and the hearts of their parents are being set up for failure in their own lives going forward. They are going to be predisposed to worship those idols when they go forward. You're setting up your children for failure whenever you do that, and the Israelites were as well. And God is not going to punish them more lightly because they were set up for failure by their parents. He's not. It's the same judgment that God is going to visit upon the children as he visits upon the parents. The same thing. Each person is held accountable for themselves, whether you're predisposed to it or not. But if you notice at the end of the verse, it says, to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me. So it's not saying the sins of the father is what he's punishing on the children, even though the sin is the same generationally in this instance. But those children who have been raised up have then made their own choice to hate God, and God will punish them and visit their iniquity in the same fashion, in the same severity as he did the parents. So there's long-lasting consequences to this sin of idolatry. And this is exactly what happened to the Israelites. If you look, Jeroboam the first, he built 2 golden calves. And he put them in 2 cities of his own kingdom because he didn't want people to leave to worship God in Jerusalem, the rightful place, because they were in another kingdom. The kingdom had divided at this point. So what does he do? He sets up 2 idols to preserve his own throne, to preserve his own reign, which he's going outside of God's provision that God has already provided him to be a king of this nation. He wants more, and so he takes it upon himself to do this. And this is a great sin for the nation of Israel. And if you look at all the subsequent kings, in every single one of these passages, if you look it up, it says this king walked in the way of his father Jeroboam, walked in the sins of Jeroboam, who set up the golden calves. He did not depart from the ways of their father Jeroboam. So all of these generations are continuing in those same footsteps. Each of these kings made their own choice, whether to follow God or not, but they were predisposed towards this idolatrous tendency, and they chose wrong. And God's iniquity, and God's punishment on their iniquity is just as severe, despite whether they were predisposed to it or not. But we are not without hope. Seems pretty bleak, but we are not without hope. The next part says, but showing mercy to thousands, to those who love me and keep my commandments. This is further evidence that each person, each generation, made their own choice. And they made the choice to not love God and to keep his commandments. God is always willing to show mercy. This mercy here is the Hebrew word hesed. It's the loving kindness. It's the mercy. It's a very popular term in the Old Testament showing God's affection and his mercy towards the people. And so mercy here, it means they've already messed up. It doesn't say that he is going to bless those who do it perfectly. He's going to show mercy. So if somebody has to show mercy on somebody else, it means that they already did something wrong. So despite already doing things wrong, despite being raised in a family that worshiped idols, they had to make their own choice. And God will show mercy if we make those wrong choices. This seems very similar to the commandment in the New Testament. Love the Lord your God with all your heart. To those who love me and keep my commandments. So, before we get to the New Testament and try to think of how we apply this to us today, let's do a brief recap. So the Israelites, they were told, thou shalt have no other gods before me. And the second commandment they were given was don't make idols for yourselves. What they did is they desired provisions outside of what God had provided for them, and they sought after those things. And what they also did is they accredited the blessings that God did give them to the idols that they had made. Whenever Aaron made the golden calf, he said, here is your God who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. They attributed to the idols the provisions that God had given to them. And because God is a jealous God, he will not be replaced with an inferior creation. And this shows a lack of faith and a lack of understanding or refusal to understand who God truly is as the provider of everything in their lives. So, when we think about our lives, modern day, God is still the same. We don't have, in America at least, these idols on every street corner being sold to us in the same fashion that they were for the Israelites. But God is still a jealous God, and he is still the one and only provider for our lives. And every good provision that comes down is from God and not from the things around us. In 1747, a laborer and his son were coming down in Honduras from working in the fields, and they didn't make it home that night. They stayed the night out under the stars, and the father woke up in the middle of the night, and something was poking him in his side. And it's dark, he reaches around, he grabs it, he throws it off, and then he goes back to sleep. And then he wakes up in the morning, and that same thing is poking him in the side. And he looks at it, and it is this 2.5-inch tall carved picture of the Virgin Mary. And he thinks, wow, well, this is really interesting. So he goes home, he puts it up in his house, and then good things start happening to him in his life. Something good would happen, he'd get a benefit from something. He'd say, hey, wow, I bet you it's because of that idol right there. I bet you that's what the Lord must be blessing me through this. And then he goes along and more things happen. Something happens in the village, something miraculous. He says, hey, it's that idol. This idol is protecting us. This little wooden, depiction, the Virgin Mary is looking over us. So this goes on for about 20 years, and eventually they build a chapel around this little image. They build an entire chapel. Then they end up building a basilica around this image. In 1925, the Pope visits this little region of Suyapa and declares this image to be the patroness of Honduras. And he gave her the name Our Lady of Suyapa. This is a picture of it. This is a true story. This is in Honduras to this day. The person who initially told me this was Jim Hazemeyer, missionary to Honduras, and this is the kind of stuff that he was confronting on a daily basis. In 1936, a mentally ill woman came up to worship Our Lady of Suyapa and decided to snatch her and ran off and said, I've got Suyapa, and runs out of the building. The police come, they search her house. She didn't live too far away from the church. They found Suyapa, and they put her back in her rightful place. 1936, 1986, some thieves broke in to the basilica and stole Suyapa. I don't know where her guards were at that point in time, but they stole it. Stripped her of her jewels and all of her metal, precious metals, gold and silver and everything. I'm sure they made a fortune off of this heist. And Our Lady Suyapa was found in the toilet of a men's restroom in a restaurant in the city. They enshrine the toilet, of course, because the toilet is now holy. And they take Our Lady Suyapa and put her back up on her pedestal. 2.5-inch carved idol. Now, as you can see, it is heavily guarded And during several of the wars that the Hondurans fought, they said what gave them the strength were these visions that came from Our Lady Suyapa. They said that whenever they got tired and they struggled, and they burst through the enemy bounds, they won the war, they pushed through to the end, and they said this was a provision of Our Lady Suyapa and not a provision of the true God. Often when I think of idols in my own life, I think of things that I spend too much time on. That has been my typical definition of what an idol is in my life. But I have to ask you, is God concerned about how much time people are spending worshiping Our Lady Suyapa? Is it that they're spending too much time focused on this little wooden thing? No, it doesn't matter how much time they're spending on it. It's any amount of worship to something that is not the Lord God is wrong. It's not necessarily a factor of how much time you're putting into it. There should be no worship given. And whenever we fail to acknowledge God rightly in his position as the ultimate provider of our lives, whenever we seek provision outside of his giftings, outside of his channels, that is idolatry, immediately, whether you spend 10 minutes doing it, whether you spend 10 years doing it. So, just thinking through some different aspects, I came up with 3 I'd like to touch on a little bit. Money, vacation, and family. So money, or our job, our career. We need to remember that raises and layoffs are from the Lord and not from our employer. In John 19, Pilate's talking to Jesus, and Jesus says, "Thou couldst have no power at all against me, except it were given you thee from above." So, when I am not content at my current salary, at my certain occupation, at my certain status within the company, what do? I buckle down hard, maybe I put some job applications in at other places, I ask for that raise, and I really work to finish these projects on time so I can impress my manager. And then whenever I get these things, when I get that better job that has better hours, that has better pay, I can afford more of the things in my life, I think, wow, this new position I'm at is really great. I really love the job where I'm working. It's great, it has good pay, it's got good hours, they're flexible with me, and we start accrediting our joy in life and the things that we can buy and everything else to this job or position or career that we have, when really we should be accrediting that to the Lord, because he's the one that provided those opportunities. If we leave God out of the process of increasing our wealth or increasing our position, we will attribute our success to that as an idol. We need to have God be part of the process of any endeavor that we intake. If we're looking to get a higher paying job, we need to pray to the Lord about that so that we can acknowledge his divine providence if he chooses to give that to us. If we're looking for a different job, a change of career, whatever it may be, we need to have God be part of the process, prayerfully asking him what his directions are. This one is a hard one for me. I called it vacation, but really it's more time off of work. It's our hobbies. It's the things that we spend time on. Some people, they look forward to the weekend. They're working Monday through Friday just to get there on Friday night and Saturday and Sunday so that they really do what they want to do. We look forward to that. We want to go on adventures. We want to hang out with friends and family. We want to do our hobbies. We want to get joy from all of these things of the world, not realizing that our joy is from the Lord. Now, the Lord can use these various things as mechanisms. We can enjoy the things of the world around us as long as we acknowledge that it is from God ultimately. I was talking to a friend of mine from college, the guy that married my wife and I, actually, and he told me that he went on a cruise. I like cruising a lot. It's a very enjoyable thing. It's a lot of fun. I get to do, see different places, just relax, no timeline, no schedule. And I asked him, how was it? Did you enjoy it? What excursions did you go on? And he said, it was a wonderful time for me and my family. It was rest and relaxation, and I really got to spend a lot of time with the Lord during that cruise. He said, got up every morning, watched the sunrise. No distractions, no timeline, no meetings he has to be at, just him and his word, praying to God. And I think, and all the things that I wanted to say caught in my throat, and I was like, he acknowledged that vacation is from the Lord. And he acknowledged that the Lord was going to use it to give him rest and give him joy. And he did all the fun and exciting things that I did on my cruise, but he had the Lord in mind every step of the way. Family. Family is a good thing to prioritize in your life, but not more than God. God said, thou shalt have no other gods before me. I love my family. I like hanging out with them, playing games. We have a fun time. We create a lot of good memories together. And if you talk to the unbelievers in the world, they'll tell you that family is really, really high up there as a priority for your life. Spend as much time with your family as you can because they're not going to be there forever. Make the memories now and they'll last you an entire lifetime. And so whenever I think about prioritizing family in my life, I'm sometimes doing it along the lines of, because I want to get these experiences, I want to do these things, I want to make sure I make these memories before they're gone, not really realizing God's the only reason I have a family. He's the only reason that we are able to get together and to have these joyous things. And I never take a step back and thank God for providing this valuable asset in my life. Children. Children are a blessing from God. And I know we've all heard messages about how we shouldn't let the kids run our lives, and play baseball every day of the week, all the way through tournaments on Sunday and everything, and let them prioritizing it over your other ministry aspects and your service to the Lord. They can be an idol in that way. But I was thinking about how Brother Bob always says to not take pride in anything other than the Lord. Now, he puts it very aggressively in, don't be proud of your children, but I think he might be onto something. Whenever we desire success for our children and we push them in that direction, and they do well, and they perform well in the world, and they're getting along, and you say that, wow, I'm so proud of them. They did such a good job. Are we proud of them, or do we take a moment to sit back and realize God is the one who is along there every step of the way? He's the one that's provided their education, their intelligence, their wealth, their success, and their decision-making abilities. It was God that gave that to them. And if we ever start praising our children and forget to include God in that as the provider, then our children are becoming an idol to us. And then we have the generational aspect. If we have this attitude of putting God in his rightful place as first and the ultimate provider in our lives, that will be inherited in our children. They will be set up for success going forward. They will still have to make their own choice, but they will be set up for success going forwards. So, there's two kind of applications that I came out of that kind of wrap this whole thing up. How we can balance from going down this path of idolatry, of forgetting to include the Lord in the things of our lives. It's not just spending less time on things. It's keeping God as the God of our lives, where he belongs to be. The first one is if you find a carved image while you're out there camping, do not put it up on the pedestal of your house, okay? Please do not. That will lead thousands of people astray down the line, okay? So if you find an idol while you're camping, you throw it away and it comes back, throw it away again, okay? Leave it out there. The second one is Thanksgiving. The Israelites in the Old Testament were not giving thanks to God for their provision. They were seeking things elsewhere. They were not content with what the Lord had provided, and that drove them to idolatry and taking things into their own hands. We, in our lives, and in every aspect of our lives, if we continue to give thanks for the Lord for providing these various things, then that will keep it from being an idol in our lives. Time is a big thing. If I spent 4 hours every night this week playing video games, yes, you could say that is wrong, and that's probably an idol in my life. But I cannot rightfully give thanks to God for every hour that I'm wasting away on those things. You know that I'm not doing that if I'm committing that much time to it. If we are actively giving thanks to God for what He has given to us, it will help keep those hobbies in check. It will help keep God as the forefront of our lives. And it will give Him the credit where the credit is actually due, and that's in everything. So let me read these verses again, and then we'll close. Exodus 20. And God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourselves a carved image, any likeness of anything that is in heaven, or that is in the earth, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them, nor serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children, to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing mercy to thousands, to those who love me and keep my commands. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this word you've given us this morning, and I pray that we will dwell on it throughout the week, and that you will convict our hearts of any idols that we are harboring there, God. Not just the time we spend on things, but putting anything before you and dethroning you as the ultimate provider of everything that we have. I pray for our brother Cornelius as he speaks, that you will open our hearts and minds, let us be attentive and strive to understand the way you reveal yourself. In your son Jesus' name we pray. Amen.